They say a house can carry a memory long after the people inside have rotted away. The boards may creak, the roof may sag, and ivy may strangle the walls. But what truly lingers is the pattern of footsteps, the echo of voices, and the unnatural bonds that once poisoned the blood within. Deep in the rural countryside, far from paved roads and electric wires, there stands a farmhouse so old its timbers bleed resin like open wounds. Few dare to approach it, not because of ghosts, though the villagers whisper of shadows pacing its windows, but because of the family who once called it home, a family that blurred the very boundaries of blood, love and kinship until no one could say who was mother, who was daughter, who was sister, and who was wife. In the oral histories of the nearby hamlet, the name of the clan is never spoken directly. To speak it aloud, they believe, invites the curse to take notice, to weave itself into the fabric of your own bloodline. Instead, they call them the crossed kin, a family that wove their lives so tightly together that their lineage became a tangled knot, impossible to unravel without revealing something unspeakable at its core. And at the heart of this knot was a woman whose title was fractured, broken between roles. She was, in whispers, both mother and sister to her children. The story is older than the memory of any living soul. It has been passed down by trembling lips, told by firelight to frighten children away from wandering near the abandoned property. But behind the folklore lies something much darker. For records, faded parish documents, scraps of testimony, and fragments of diaries suggest that this was not simply a tale to keep children obedient. It was real, a pattern of marriages, unions, and births that wove a web of forbidden kinship so intricate that even priests refused to bless the graves. They say the family dug their own cemetery on the edge of the field, because no churchyard would claim them. What is most unsettling is not that such unions occurred. History is filled with cases of isolation driving bloodlines inward, but the ritualistic way in which this family seemed to embrace it. It was not desperation but devotion, as though the breaking of natural law was not a byproduct of isolation, but a deliberate choice. A tradition, an inheritance passed not in name or wealth, but in sin. And so the question emerges, one that chills the marrow. What happens to a lineage when the roles of sister and mother, of father and brother collapse into one? When the very structure of family, the foundation of human society, becomes a labyrinth of mirrors where every face reflects another? The answer lies in the shadow of that farmhouse, in the fading records of those who tried to escape, and in the whispers of villagers who still refuse to speak the names. This is not just a story of a cursed family. It is the story of generations who became trapped in the collapsing circle of their own blood. A family where the mother was also a sister, and the sins of kinship repeated themselves like a prayer muttered across centuries. The farmhouse stands in silence, a hollowed relic surrounded by fields that have long since gone to seed. No plow touches its soil, no animals graze upon its land. The villagers say the earth itself there has grown barren, not for lack of water or sun, but because it has been choked by blood. To look upon the crooked house from the dirt road is to feel an unease that defies explanation. Windows stare outward like watchful eyes, darkened panes still bearing the faint outlines of curtains that once swayed with life. No one recalls the last time smoke rose from its chimney, but everyone remembers the stories. The first account comes from the church records in the late 1700s. The parish priest, Father Albin, wrote in his notes of a family who keep to themselves and wed only among their own. He described them as a stubborn line, proud of their name, unwilling to let it dilute. His words, though written with formality, carry an undertone of unease. The family would appear at mass in a cluster, their faces pale and watchful, their bodies stiff. The daughters, it was said, bore uncanny resemblance to their mothers, so much so that the priest admitted privately that he often confused one generation with another. It was not only resemblance that disturbed him, it was the way they moved, as though the younger mirrored the older. A daughter would step forward, and her mother would follow with the same gait, the same tilt of the head, the same faint smile. Parishioners whispered that to look upon them was to feel one's own reflection staring back. The villagers grew wary, but fear hardened into rumor when a tragedy struck. In 1793, a fire swept through the village tavern, killing 3 men. When their bodies were carried into the church, women wept, but the crossed-kin family did not. They stood at the back of the congregation, silent, their eyes fixed not on the coffins but on each other. It was then that whispers began, that they had no need to grieve the dead, because their bonds to one another ran deeper, stranger, than any outsider could understand. By the early 1800s, the family had all but withdrawn from village life. They farmed their own land, traded rarely, and married only within the bounds of their household. To outsiders, they offered polite but distant words, often delivered in voices eerily similar, as though they had rehearsed together. Travelers who passed through were unnerved by the sight of children who looked like smaller, slighter copies of the adults beside them. Some swore the children did not speak at all, only watched with unblinking eyes. Then came the diaries. In the attic of the parish, long after the last priest had fled the region, a set of water-damaged journals were discovered. They were written by a girl whose name had been erased in places, though the villagers believe she was of the crossed kin. Her handwriting is delicate, her words sharp. She wrote of the union that must be kept, of blood that folds into blood. One line in particular has become infamous in the surrounding villages. "She is my sister. She is my mother, and I shall be her in time." The villagers still repeat those words, sometimes as a warning, sometimes as a curse. They believe the girl did not escape her fate. She grew into it, like her mother before her, like her daughter after. A cycle not broken by chance, but preserved by ritual. Local folklore claims that the family cemetery still lies hidden in the tall grass behind the farmhouse. Children who dare each other to wander there at night say they've seen strange stones, unmarked but clustered tightly, as though the dead were stacked together even beneath the soil. Some swear they've heard voices drifting through the fields, a layered chorus of women repeating the same words in unison. Always women. The villagers will not walk the land, not even in daylight. For them, the house is not abandoned. It is waiting. The family is gone, but the bonds they made, the roles they blurred, left a stain that seeps into the wood, into the soil, into memory itself. And so the mystery lingers. Who was the first to break the sacred line between mother and child, brother and sister? Was it desperation, an accident of isolation, or something chosen, sanctified, and passed down? Each generation folded into the last, until no one could untangle them. The story remains alive not because of proof, but because of fear. The fear that somewhere in that house, in that cursed soil, lies an inheritance too twisted to remain buried. There is a threshold in every legend where folklore ceases to feel like a story, and instead begins to resemble something else. A memory, perhaps, or a wound that refuses to close. For the family the villagers call the crossed kin, that threshold is crossed in the fragments that remain, the brittle papers left behind, the scratched testimonies of those who encountered them, and the strange objects unearthed in the soil around their home. From these scraps emerges a picture not of accidental isolation, but of something far more intentional, a tradition that clung to them like a parasite, passed down as faithfully as religion itself. The first fragment comes from the parish records of 1821, where Father Marek wrote of baptizing a child whose mother refused to name the father. This was not unusual in poor rural villages, where shame sometimes outweighed confession, but what disturbed him was the way the family reacted. Instead of embarrassment or reluctance, there was pride. He wrote, "The child was brought to me by her mother, yet she did not kneel nor bow. She placed the girl in my arms with a calm smile, and when I asked of the father's name, she said only, 'He dwells under this same roof.' Her sisters, or perhaps daughters, all nodded in unison, as though the words had been rehearsed. I dared not press her further, for their eyes upon me were many, and they did not blink." The priest's words betray his fear, but what is more haunting is the certainty with which the mother spoke. To her, no distinction was needed. Father, brother, husband, the titles were interchangeable, folded into one. In the decades that followed, more such children were born, and more records bear the same absence. The names blur. The mothers appear too young or too old, or strangely familiar across time. Some villagers swore that the women did not age properly, that a girl of 14 looked as though she were her mother's twin, and that when the mother aged into her 30s, the daughter aged with her, a reflection caught in a mirror that refused to break. Then came the discoveries in the farmhouse itself. When it was finally abandoned, scavengers entered the rotting structure in search of valuables. What they found instead were small bundles wrapped in linen, hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside were locks of hair braided together, not 2 but 3, 4, sometimes 5 strands woven as one. On one, a faint inscription had been stitched into the cloth. Bound in flesh, bound in soul. Worse still was the discovery of a diary belonging to a woman whose name had been smudged by time, though many believe she was the same girl whose earlier writings were found in the parish attic. Her entries are fragmented, but the tone is unmistakably proud, even reverent. The world outside does not understand. They see lines where we see circles. A mother is a sister, a brother is a husband, and all return to the same womb in the end. What is purer than blood folded into itself, made stronger with each binding. We are not cursed, we are chosen. The pages grow darker as her words continue. She speaks of children born who bore deformities, twisted limbs, pale eyes clouded like milk, mouths too small to form speech. But instead of sorrow, she describes them as offerings. One line reads, "The flawed ones return to the soil sooner, and the soil grows sweeter for it." This belief, that malformed children were not tragedies but sacrifices, spread through her entries like a chant. And though the villagers whispered of shallow graves in the fields, none dared to exhume them. The earth around the farmhouse was said to shift, as though something beneath it refused to stay still. Another disturbing detail comes from an account by a traveling doctor, summoned to treat a fever in one of the younger children. His notes, preserved in a medical journal decades later, described the visit. Upon entering the home, I could not distinguish the mother from the elder daughters. Their faces were near identical, their speech overlapping as though they shared one thought among them. The child, pale and trembling, was brought forth not by a single parent, but by a chorus of women, each claiming her as their own. When I asked who had birthed her, 3 hands rose. I could not proceed further, for the weight of their gaze seemed to press against my chest. He left that same night, refusing payment, and warned others never to attend the household again. By the late 19th century, the family had become entirely insular. No outsiders were invited, no marriages recorded beyond their walls. Their own cemetery, half hidden by grass, began to swell with crooked stones. None bore names, only crude symbols etched into the rock, circles folding into circles, spirals swallowing themselves. The villagers say those who dared to sketch these symbols found their ink bled through the paper as though repelled. It was during this time that the most chilling testimony emerged. A man named Lucas, a farmhand who briefly worked the edge of their property, confessed on his deathbed to what he had seen. His words, written by his grandson, are some of the last direct accounts of the family's private rituals. I heard them in the night. The voices of women, many together chanting like prayer, but not to any god I know. They called to each other as mother, as sister, as wife. The children stood among them, silent, watching, their hands joined. They spoke of a womb that holds all, a womb that never ends. I saw the eldest embrace the youngest as though no boundary lay between them. They kissed and the others smiled. It was not shame but joy. I ran from that place and never returned. The villagers repeat his story with a shudder, not because they doubt it, but because it fits too neatly with the fragments they already knew. The family was not merely tangled by accident of blood. They had made a choice, a vow, a cycle that turned inwards, collapsing like a spiral staircase descending into darkness. And yet the most disturbing detail is not in what was seen, but in what was not. When the family finally vanished, leaving the farmhouse empty, no one could say where they had gone. No bodies were found inside. The cemetery stones remained, but fresh soil had been turned atop them, as though the ground had swallowed more than it revealed. Some whisper they all went into the earth together. Others believe they still walk the house at night, unseen but never gone. The tale lingers because of one truth. In that house, the most sacred human bond between parent and child had been broken and rewritten until it became unrecognizable. A mother was also a sister also a wife. Blood folded into itself like paper too many times until it no longer resembled the shape it once held. The farmhouse still stands, though time has tried to bury it. The roof sags inward, black mold crawls up the plaster, and ivy coils through shattered windows like veins reclaiming a body. Yet for all its decay, the house never truly dies. It persists, as though the ground itself refuses to let it collapse, holding its crooked frame upright like a gallows left, waiting for its next victim. The villagers still pass it by in silence. Even today, generations later, parents clutch their children's hands tighter when the road bends near its silhouette. They say not to look directly at the windows, for sometimes, just sometimes, you may catch the faintest glimpse of a face. Pale, expressionless, watching. Always watching. In the local taverns, the story is retold in hushed voices. Old men still warn the young not to speak the family's true name. To name them is to summon them, to invite the knot of their bloodline into your own. And though skeptics laugh, the same skeptics fall silent when reminded of the children who vanish in the surrounding woods every few decades. Rare incidents, explained away as wolves or accidents, yet always clustered around the same cursed land. There is a saying in the village, blood calls to blood. The elders believe the crossed kin never truly vanished. They only sank into the soil, into the marrow of the land itself. They whisper that the family's circle continues, not in the daylight world, but beneath the earth, where roots and bones intertwine. There, a mother is still a sister. A daughter still grows into the shape of her mother, repeating the cycle in endless, suffocating silence. Some claim to have heard it. On nights when the moon is hidden and the fields are cloaked in black, a sound rises from the earth near the farmhouse. Not the cry of animals, nor the wind through the trees, but a layered chorus of women's voices murmuring in unison. The words are never clear, but the rhythm is unmistakable. A chant, a litany, a prayer not meant for human ears. Those who linger too long say the sound begins to align with their own heartbeat, until it feels as though their blood itself is joining the chorus, and then there are the dreams. For those unlucky enough to spend a night within sight of the farmhouse, sleep comes heavy and suffocating. Travelers who once sheltered there reported the same vision, standing in a room lined with mirrors, each reflection showing a face that was their own, but subtly altered, more feminine, more childlike, more aged. Each reflection called them by a different name: mother, sister, daughter, wife. Some awoke screaming, convinced they no longer knew who they were. The villagers refused to sleep within a mile of the place. They believe the family's cycle seeks not only to preserve itself, but to grow, to pull in the blood of outsiders, binding them into the endless knot. The line between memory and inheritance becomes dangerously thin. It is perhaps this fear, the fear of becoming part of the circle, that has kept the legend alive. For in every retelling, the same question is asked, though never answered. What becomes of a lineage that devours itself? Do they vanish, as bones eventually do, or do they persist, hidden, waiting, patient? On the edge of the farmhouse's forgotten cemetery, one crooked stone bears a faint spiral still visible even under moss and time. The villagers say if you place your ear against it, you will hear a heartbeat. Not faint, not fading, but strong, steady as the pulse in your own wrist. No one lingers long enough to confirm it twice, and so the story ends, not with closure, but with dread. The family's name is erased, their bloodline unrecorded in official histories, their house left to rot. Yet in whispers, in dreams, and in the shadows of the land they once claimed, they endure. For what is erased is not always forgotten. What is buried is not always gone. Perhaps one night, when the wind dies and the fields grow still, you may hear it too. The overlapping voices of women calling each other by names that no longer mean what we think they should. Names that fold into themselves until they collapse into silence. And when you hear it, remember this. A mother can also be a sister. A sister can also be a wife. And blood once tangled may never be undone.